Welcome to the Women at the Top podcast interview series. My name is Regina Barr, and I'm the founder of the Women at the Top Network. I'll be your host today. For those of you who don't know us, Women at the Top is a community of like-minded women who share the Watt vision and mission. And our goal, simply put, is to empower aspiring women to lead. And we do this in a couple of ways, by providing information, trading, and connections. I'm so excited to have Dr. Arin Reeves, author of In Charge, the Energy Management Guide for Badass Women Who Are Tired of Being Tired. So before we get started, I do want to tell you just a little bit about Arin. Arin is a leading researcher, author, and advisor in the fields of leadership and inclusion. She studied business at DePaul University's College of Commerce, attended law school at the University of Southern California, and if that wasn't enough, she received her PhD in sociology from Northwestern University. Arin is a best-selling author of 4 books: In Charge, Smarter Than a Lie, One Size Never Fits All, and The Next IQ. Arin has designed and led several comprehensive research projects on leadership and inclusion in various topics related to diversity, inclusion, and equity. Before NextGens, Arin practiced law for several years and served as an adjunct professor at Northwestern University, where she taught classes on law and society. On that note, welcome to our program today, Arin.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're really excited, so we're going to jump right in and get started. And I always love to hear some of the backstory from our guests about their books and so forth. So tell us a little bit about what led you to write your most recent book, In Charge.
Absolutely. I am a researcher at heart. So I was a lawyer, all of that. But when something doesn't make sense to me in the world, the way that I think I process it and understand it is I jump into it, and say, why is this happening? And I was noticing before the pandemic that more and more, as working on gender equity and gender equality in workplaces, that women were constantly saying they were exhausted, like just really tired. And they were actually talking about being exhausted as one of the reasons they were leaving, right? So they were saying, I just can't do it anymore. Not, I'm not capable of it, not, I don't want to, but I just can't do it anymore. So I started getting really interested with this idea of, wait, is this normal that women are tired? And then I started getting this other data about how, autoimmune diseases among women are skyrocketing, heart disease among women are skyrocketing. And then the pandemic happened. And I just kept hearing from women that I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Like, I'm doing all the stuff in my life that I like, but I'm waking up exhausted every single day. And it's not physical, it's not medical. I'm taking my vitamins, it's not that. And please don't tell me to take a bath or get a massage. And so then I, started noticing that with my coaching clients as well, and started putting together interviews and noticed that I was going through it in my own life as well. And so I started writing the book over the pandemic as a way to really process what was happening to women.
So interesting that you say that, because as you're talking about this, women being tired, it used to be you would say to people, how are you doing? And they would say, busy. Now you say, how you're doing. And I agree with you. A lot of women, and perhaps I'm guilty of this too, I'll say I'm tired or I'm exhausted, or that you get to a point, and I'm like you, I'm very high energy. I like to do and be involved in a lot of things. I serve on a lot of nonprofit boards. I do a podcast. I'm writing all the time, so I'm doing things that I really want to be doing. So I can appreciate that. And I'm really glad we're having this opportunity to have this conversation, because I know that a lot of people listening in, this is resonating with them.
Absolutely.
So your book talks about energy management, and this is something I do try to use in my personal life and my professional life. And I do try to build my day around doing things that require that high level of creative energy when I can. So you focus not only on energy management, but how to identify life drainers. And I think this is something that's really important for us to talk about. So tell us more about this and why these life drainers are impacting women's lives more than men's lives right now?
Sure. And I think one of the things that I think makes me saddest about hearing women say that they're tired, and this includes even me, is we're not tired from doing a bunch of stuff we don't want to do. We're actually tired from trying to do things we want to do, right? Um, and this, one of the reasons that women's energy drains a lot faster than men's energy is because we are constantly asked to manage people's emotions for them, right? So in our workplaces as leaders, there's so much data out there that shows that people prefer to work for female leaders. Why? Because female leaders are more empathetic. They care more about them. They mentor them. You go into any organization and the female leaders are sitting on way more committees than the male leaders are. They are, you know, the ones that are managing a meeting, like the emotions of a meeting, they're the ones who will check in on colleagues afterwards, right? And they also, their emotional management day isn't done when they leave work. And it isn't just about kids. It involves kids as well. You come home and you're managing the emotions in a marriage, you're managing the emotions as a parent, but you don't have to be a parent. Like one of the women in the book, she's, you know, she's a sister. She has two siblings who are brothers. And when there's a death in the family, the brothers are like, are you going to organize everything? Right. And so we end up doing the organizing, the emotional management, the managing other people's emotions for them. And so we have drains that are not our responsibility. And there's a lot of research out there, you know, that says, well, women need to say no. Bullshit, honestly, because women know how to say no. Other people don't know how to respect women's no's, right? And so these articles that tell women, well, you need to learn how to say no, or you should say no more often, are making women feel like, oh, here I go again. There's one more thing that I'm not doing right. But the truth is, women say no. We say no about our bodies. We say no about our time. We say no about our energy. But men and women alike don't respect the no. They're like, oh, but can you please, 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 until you're like, fine, it's just easier to do it than to listen to you whine, right? So part of the energy drain is us recognizing when we need to stick to that no, even though it's going to hurt, because it's going to hurt more to back out of the no, right?
Mhm.
Go
It's
ahead.
so interesting that you say that, because I do think women do say no. And it was interesting when you said that people will keep coming at you, and literally you get to a point where you just get worn down and you're just like, okay, fine. What I have learned to do, and maybe you have too, is I always tell women, say no with a twist. So I don't want to get involved with things like my sort of question or word for the year is flourish. So I ask myself, is this going to help me flourish or not? Because I get a lot of requests, to, for example, to be on boards. So I ask a lot of questions. Well, what are your goals and what skill sets are you looking for? Is this a strategic board? Is this not? And then if I assess that this is not the right fit for me, I tell them, you know what, this is not a right fit for me, but why don't you connect with X, Y, or Z? Because I think they'd be perfect with your board. And sometimes that helps shut them down. But you know,
Absolutely.
it's a crapshoot, right?
But you just also showed how hard you're working
To say no.
so that they will accept that no.
Mhm.
Do you know what men do? They go, I don't want to. Do you know how much energy that took? None,
Zero.
right? I mean, I tried it last year. If somebody asked me something, I would say, I don't want to. They literally would look at me like I wasn't speaking English. And they're like, what do you mean? I was
What do
like,
you mean?
I don't want to. They're like, but I'm asking you. And I was like, you asked me, I gave you my answer. I don't. And it was like a foreign thing. Like
Because they're
women
not used
don't,
to women saying no, or
and
that
they're
they don't
not
want to
used
do
to women
something.
saying, I don't want to.
Mhm.
And I don't feel like making up an excuse to make you feel better. I just don't want to. And so I have an entire chapter on cursing in the book, because science has shown, mostly just to justify my behavior, but science has shown that cursing helps. And I said to this one person who asked me to serve on a board, and they didn't bother even approaching me from the perspective of, hey, this is why it's good for you, right? Like they were like, I need you to do this. I need you to serve on this board. And I said, I don't want to. And they're like, I don't understand. I said, I don't fucking want to. And they're like, I was like, do you understand it now? And they literally were like, no. And I think that's what we struggle with, is we have been told over the course of our lives that we don't get to say no and hurt other people's feelings.
Mhm.
We have to do all of the work to make sure that our no is delivered in like the sweetest, fluffiest way possible. And that if they keep asking us, that they deserve for us to keep talking until they get it. And I look at men in those similar situations. So let's say, Regina, that someone asked you to serve on a board. They asked a man to serve on a board, right? And let's say that both of you that day, we all start with 100 units of energy, right? You just took 20 units of energy to tell them no. You thought about who to recommend to them. You thought about how you were going to say this so you didn't hurt their feelings. That man expended 1 unit. He was like, no, I don't think that's going to work for me, but thanks for asking. And move on. Well, at 5 o'clock, he has way more energy left to do business development. He has way more energy left to do the other things to maybe put into his business if he's an entrepreneur, right? But what
Mhm.
he's not saying at 10 o'clock, and if he goes home and he's a parent and he's married to a woman, that woman is doing them. So at 10 o'clock at night, he's like, ooh, that was a good day. She's like, I am so tired.
And the
Like,
woman's like, hey, I got to go to bed. See you tomorrow.
and is that is the energy drain piece of it, right? What
Yes.
are the things that you're doing to make sure everybody else is okay?
Yes.
And the other part of it is we have to start asking ourselves, you know, if I go to bed every night with an energy deficiency, where am I getting that from? Well, you're borrowing it from your future.
Mhm.
And if you're borrowing it from your future, guess where it shows up? It shows up in your body as ailment, right? You
Mhm.
borrow enough energy from your future, you're going to end up with an autoimmune disease. You're going to end up with chronic stress disorders. You're going to end up with heart disease. You're going to end up with obesity. Like all these things that, you know, I was coaching someone the other day. She was like, I need to lose weight. I need to get to the gym. I was like, say no more often, you're going to lose the weight. Because
Mhm.
you're literally holding on to the weight because you're producing too much cortisol because of the number of things you don't feel like you can say no to. So it the physical energy, the mental energy, and the emotional energy all go together. But we do, like I do it all the time too. I take so much time to care about how I say no. Like I'll
Yes.
say, this isn't a good fit for me right now. But what are some other ways I can help you? I can't do what you're asking me to do, but I'm happy to look over that document for you once you do it. Like, I never feel like just a no is okay for me to
So
say.
we all have to practice that. Just say
Yeah.
no. Remember that? That was
Yes,
like drugs or something
yes,
back in the day. Just say no. So
yes,
we just have to learn to say no. If it's like for me, if it's not what I'm trying to do is if it's not something that I feel is going to help me flourish, I say no. And it's helped me just having that mindset, if you will. So we're tired.
yes.
And even just hearing you talking about how you have to expend this energy to say no. And I love how you focus on look at your energy as units and you want to have some units left at the end of the day, right? For yourself and for other things, for your family or whatever it is that is meaning for you at the end of the day. So, as we talked about, lots of women are tired. I totally relate. We're hearing more instead of I'm not busy. They don't say I'm busy, they say I'm tired. Why is this? And especially, why is this coming out of the pandemic? What is going on?
So the pandemic caused all of us to do more emotional reflection and emotional management. And when you think about March, April, May, June, July of 2020, we were surrounded by death, right? Like if you turned on your television, you saw death. And in every society in the world, women are the holders of death. Like literally, we are the ones who help societies process death, right? If you think about the medical profession, nurses are the ones that help families process death. Nurses are the ones that help. So all of women end up in caretaking professions, right? We are the nurses, we're the teachers. We are the managers that are making sure everybody's okay.
Mhm.
And that was what we did in 2020, in 2021. We were homeschooling our children. I remember the New York Times had an article called The Scream, like the Primal Scream series, where it was literally, they had an open hotline for women to call and scream about what was going on. And women were like, I can't do this anymore. And I remember and those audio voicemails were actually like open for everybody to hear. And this one woman said, I'm so tired of my child walking past my husband and coming to me and saying, I need a parent to sign this. And she was screaming this, and she said, I looked at my child, it's like a second grader, and she goes, I'm not a single parent. You have another parent. You just walk past the other parent to come to me. And it's this, so women, we were at home, we were in caretaking positions, but we're also in our professional lives, we're in caretaking positions. And the heaviness of that, while we're going through stress, we don't feel the exhaustion sometimes because we've got the adrenaline. End of 2021, 2022 is where women were like, what is going on? I've never felt this tired before. And it's because of how much work you had to do emotionally in 2020 and 2021. So the pandemic caused our society to need more social caretakers. And who do we turn to when our communities, our families need caretaking? Is we turn to women, right? And just the professions themselves, who got hit the hardest in the pandemic?
Mhm.
Teachers and nurses, 90% women, right? Female managers were given, even if they weren't given the responsibility, took on the responsibility of calling each team member, are you okay? Is your family okay? I was on a lot of Zoom calls, and women started those calls very differently than men did. Men jumped
Mhm.
into business, and women would say, I want to check in on everybody. How is everybody doing? Are you okay? Are you taking care of yourself? There were more moms who marched in the protests than dad in 2020 after the George Floyd murder. Like so you look at any aspect of what was happening in society, and you saw women at the forefront of that. And so it resulted in,
So women are taking on this role either by default or because we're hardwired that way. We do tend to be a little more relational than
yeah,
transactional. Men tend to be more transactional than relational. And so we talked earlier about being willing to just say no, but as you know, it's very hard. We just culturally fall into those roles.
yes.
What can we do from a practical standpoint to protect our energy and say no more often? What would you suggest? Because, I think it is a hard thing, especially because we've also trained people in that we're going to take that role on. And I was thinking about when you said with death, women kind of own that. I lost two siblings, and both times my oldest brother was like, well, what, you're going to plan all that and organize it. And one time I was expecting him to speak, and at the very last minute, because of some issues that had happened with one of my brothers, he told me he wasn't going to speak. And I was devastated because, like, talk about then the whole burden being on me, like getting up and speaking. He did wind up speaking after he heard me speak and how I positioned some of the challenges our family had faced. But he kind of left me in the lurch, like holding the ball, literally and figuratively. So what practically, if we've trained people in that we're going to own that part of the relationship, whether it's at home or at work, what could we do to rescind that or or put that back on others?
Yeah. So there's two pieces to that, right? One is, and I think what you're getting at is that sometimes it's not possible. And sometimes, let me back up. The very first thing that women need to do more of is watch your energy, right? Like stop 3, 4 times a day. And on a scale of 0 to 10, just say, what's my energy level right now? Right. And if you see that consistently after doing something that your energy level drops, right? So if you say over 4 or 5 times a day, like I'm at an 8, I'm at a 7, ooh, I'm at a 3. Well, what happened to make me a 3? And if you start really watching your energy level, you notice like the things that actually drain you really quickly. And that awareness leads you to make better decisions. But sometimes you may not have the choice, right? And you may not have the option. I was put in a similar situation after my dad died, many years ago. When friends are sick, it's just, even when I'm sick, I end up taking care of myself, like, because there's no choice sometimes. What you have to remember is in that moment, like, so when you had to then handle that, right? You can look at yourself in the mirror and say, at the end of the day today, I am going to be at a pretty severe energy deficiency, which means I am going to take tomorrow and day after and disappear, right? I am not showing up to the breakfast tomorrow. I'm not showing up to whatever tomorrow. So part of this is when we don't have a choice, you have to focus on your resilience. And your resilience is you cannot not have a choice every single day, because that is going to destroy you. But if you say, well, today I don't have a choice, tomorrow I'm going to make sure I have a choice. So tomorrow I'm just not showing up for anything, right? I'm going to take a day off. I am going to unplug because I need to put back in what got taken out with or without my consent today.
Yep, got to refill that well.
Right. And you
So,
can't wait for a vacation to do that. You can't
no, I totally agree. So
be it. Like
I'll
it has
tell you,
to, within 24, 48 hours, you got to refill when you have something drained like that.
otherwise you're just going to continue to have that deficit moving forward. Totally agree. It's interesting because I thought of FOMO, fear of missing out, and I think sometimes I know I have been guilty of this. Comes back from my childhood days when I bore a very large amount of responsibility in our very dysfunctional family. And I had to kind of relearn. Like, I mean, there were like times when I would be taking care of my siblings and then protecting my mom and then feeding us and going to school and staying up late to get work done. And I carried that over. So I had to learn to get over that for myself. And I think sometimes if that deficit continues too far into the future, we start to look at things like we're not just tired anymore. Now we're really burned out. And that can create some other challenges for us. I happened to look at a study or an article by McKinsey where they said 42% of women are reporting being burned out. So, what are some common misconceptions around burnout, and how do women and men handle this differently?
Well, whenever somebody says FOMO, I say FODE, right? Like, that's fear of dying early, which is the greater fear, because if you give in to FOMO too much, you will die early. Like, that's what burnout is. Burnout is when you have collapsed all of your emotional, mental, and physical energy, right? And whatever excuse you're making to say, nope, I still have to do this, I still have to do this, I still have to do this, you need to be afraid of dying early, right? And we have to remind ourselves that this energy is coming from somewhere. And there are things that different people do. Like one woman I was coaching said what she did was she literally in her mind created this like bank of time for her grandchildren. And she would literally say, this is the energy that's going to go to my grandchildren. She doesn't even have grandchildren yet, right? She was like, this is the energy that's going to go to my grandchildren like 10 years from now. And then when people would ask her to do things, she's like, do I want to withdraw from the energy that I want to spend with my grandchildren? And so what she was doing was treating it, she was a financial person, she was treating it like a bank account, right? She was banking her energy for the future instead of going into an energy debt.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I don't like money debt, but why am I okay with an energy debt? And when I mean, we have better sense with money. Like, Regina, let's say you had $100 and someone came to you and said, Regina, I need $20. You will be like, wait a minute. Like, what do you mean you need $20? It's not your $20, it's my $20. And unless you have a really good reason, or unless I've given birth to you, or I've given birth to you and you have a really good reason, you can't just have my $20. Think about how quickly we say that with money. Now, what if we looked at energy the same way, right? Burnout is you're broke. You're broke and severely in debt. You owe $10 million and you don't have any income coming in. And people seem to really get that when we do it with money, because you said before, like, women tend to be more relational. We also tend to be more conservative with money.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say that to women, I'm like, you are broke, in debt, and you don't have an income. How do you feel? And you just see women's faces go, oh, I would never let
Exactly.
myself get there. And I'm like, but if we use time as a resource, if we use energy as a resource and compare it to money as a resource, why are you so much more protective about money than you are with your energy, when it's actually your energy that helps you make money, right?
Right.
And it's like, whenever I start coaching someone, I'm like, oh, you're not poor, you're broke. Like, to me, poor is like tired. Burned out is broken in debt.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
What are you
I,
going to do to get out of debt? And what are you going to do to get an income, right? Which is energy in.
right.
Because you're putting out energy and you're not taking energy in. And does anybody get out of debt that way? No. And
No.
so when you start thinking about it that way, burnout becomes not overwhelming to think about. It's something very concrete that you can
Mm-hmm.
start measuring, which is why I talk about energy units, because
Mm-hmm.
it helps us just get really practical about it. And there are times I walk away from a conversation and I'm just like, you literally drained like 20 units from me, which means next time I'm going to be so much more careful about scheduling a call with you, because
Right.
I,
Because
I
that
don't
person is a drainer, right?
I
That's one
don't
of
have 20 to drain. I don't, right?
mm-hmm.
So you become more protective the way you are with money, which has always been interesting to me, that we are so much more protective with money than we are with our energy.
So let's shift a little here. And a lot of people talk about self-care. We were kind of joking about that before we started our program today. We know it's important that we find time for ourselves. It really sounds great on paper, but sometimes that's harder than it sounds. And I will tell you, I'm a person that is very much about scheduling in time for myself, but sometimes that time is not sacrosanct, right? I give it up. Somebody else comes along and, oh, woe is me, they need some help. So I'm like, oh, okay. So let's talk a little bit about that. What have you learned when it comes to self-care?
I think the idea of self-care has just become really twisted. Um, it's self-care is different for everyone, right? I have ADHD. So telling me to sit still as self-care is like the worst possible thing, right? I box for self-care. Like, I put on gloves and I hit a hard bag, and that is what gives me energy. I have a friend who needs to sit still in a quiet room for energy. It's self-care. Self-care isn't about meditation or going for a hike or any one thing. It's about you knowing what fills you, what is that energy income for you, and making sure that you do that, because you're gonna go broke if you don't, right? And so it's whatever that is. And by the way, give yourself some grace that it could be different day to day for you. There
Mhm.
are some days where sleeping in an hour is self-care for me, right? There are other days when bouncing out of bed at 4 and going for a walk to go see the sunrise is what fills me with energy that day. The more you become acquainted with your energy levels, right? And the more you understand that physical energy is different than mental energy, is different than emotional energy, but they work together. There are days where I'm like, I'm physically tired, but I'm mentally fine. So that means I'm going to lay down on my bed, but maybe get a report out that I've been working on. There may be another day where I'm like physically bouncing off the walls, but I'm mentally tired. If I try to sit down and like read something, I'm going to lose my mind. I need to go use up this physical energy, right? So
Mhm.
it's really about saying to yourself, what is that? And getting those, I have to do this out of your mind. Like if you're somebody that feels rejuvenated after a bath, take bath, right? I sit in a bath for 2 minutes. I'm like, I want to get out, right? Because look at that, baths don't do it for me. So I don't take baths. So I think stop reading lists of what self-care are. You know what self-care is. You know what makes you feel better, right? You know what puts energy in. You know the people that put energy in. Do more of that and do less of the stuff that is draining your energy. That's self-care. Getting out of energy debt, right? Like having energy left over at the end of the day that you can bank, because that is how what you would do with money. You wouldn't waste it. You wouldn't waste it, especially on somebody who didn't deserve it from you. So to me,
Yes.
here is that like very individualized and
Okay.
deliberate um, energy management for yourself. And it could mean completely different things for everybody. And for you, it could mean very different things on different days. So don't force yourself to do something because you've decided that's like a self-care thing. Because on Tuesday, it may not be self-care, but on Wednesday, it may be, right?
Absolutely. And I'm chuckling when you said the bath thing because I call it having a spa night, but I'm like then I'm a multitasker still. Like I'll have on a face mask and I'll do a little soak in the tub with some Epsom salts, and then I'll be like catching up on a reading on a fun book or something not business related. And then I literally have to tell my husband it's a spa night, otherwise he'll be interrupting me. And I'm like, hey, I'm going
Yeah,
to do a little spa night, and that's code for leave me alone.
not, yeah.
So it's just what it's to your point, whatever works. Today, I'm actually doing a networking event and it's pedicures and networking with a very small group of women. And I feel like I'm going to, again, it sounds a little multitasking ish, but I'm going to be connecting with women in a way that women like to connect, pampering myself a little bit, but also getting some business done, building some relationships. So I think sometimes we just have to get a little creative. And during the pandemic, because I'm an extrovert and I felt so isolated, for some of the people that were willing to do it, I started to do a lot more walk and talks because I'm not ADHD, but I am a physical move around person. Like if somebody said, why don't you sit and meditate? I'd fall asleep. My body is
Yeah,
going, needs to be going. I can meditate while I'm walking,
it's
but not, so everybody has to kind of find what works for them. There's no
absolutely.
right or wrong. So I do
Um,
want to talk
I
before
want to
we,
go back to something that you said though, which I think
yeah,
is important though, and that is whatever does work for you, you do have to schedule it, right? And because you said you schedule that time, and it is whatever works for you, you have to schedule it. So for example, I work with a trainer and it is on my calendar that I box. And on the days that I work with my trainer, like I can't have meetings start early, right? And it is a big discussion if we're going to put a meeting on a day that I'm boxing. Or if I travel on a particular day, for example, then the day before, like 2 hours before I catch the flight or 3 hours, I don't schedule things. So you have to make a big part of energy management is managing your calendar to support whatever it
mhm,
is that you're trying to do with energy management and not kind of hoping and wishing that it happens. I'm coaching this woman right now where She literally has made up a person that she has appointments with in her calendar, right?
It's
Because
funny.
it's a collective calendar. Everybody can look at her calendar. And she was like, I hate this back-to-back meeting. So every time there's like an hour meeting, her assistant knows to put in a meeting with this woman who doesn't exist right after that. That gives her a half-hour break before the next meeting. Because
Right.
if anybody sees time, they grab it. So her assistant just goes through and puts all these, and people are like, who is this woman? She's like, oh, she's the consultant we're working with on this, and it's her alter ego, right? But it's
That's funny.
make the calendar work for you however
Yes.
you need it to, but the scheduling is really important.
So, we've been talking about women having energy deficits and getting burned out and things like that. And I think we've all heard of the Great Resignation, and I don't think we talk a lot about the impact that's had on women. And there was a study that I was looking at from Deloitte, and they said the number one reason women are leaving and will likely continue to leave is burnout.
Yep.
So, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think we need to stop calling it the Great Resignation. That sounds entirely too elegant, right? Like that sounds like women have like glasses
Like
of
it's a
wine.
positive. Yeah, and
Right.
it's not.
Like
Yes.
the take this job and shove it movement was what it was, right? Where women were like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not playing by your rules. I'm not coming back to the office 5 days a week. I'm not doing it, right? So to me, it was an amazing protest and rejection of workplaces and the way that they work. And I really do think like the Great Resignation sounds way too elegant for what was actually happening. But I do think that women did do that. Well, we're back to it now, though. A lot of those women went back to the workplaces, and we're back to workplaces saying 5 days a week, right? Or 4 days a week. The pandemic has left a footprint, but it's not as deep as we thought it would be like last year. So I think for women, one, really understand if if your job is more draining than gaining. And this can sometimes become a very privileged conversation because there's a lot of women in this world who don't have a choice but to do
Mhm.
the work that they're in right now because their families need the income, they need the income. So, you know, and getting income for your family is an energy gain. That is the form of energy that you need for your family. So you need to ask yourself, is my job net gain or net loss? And if it is a net loss, you're going to burn out. And honestly, burnout means you're going to die early. Like, I don't know how else to say it. Like, people just go, I'm burned out, and they think it's just a euphemism for being tired. And the World Health Organization has done multiple studies on this now, and it shows a mortality attached to this, right? So when somebody asks me to do something, literally, or asks anybody to ask one of your listeners to do something, ask yourself, are you freaking worth dying for? Like, that needs to be your calculus. Is this job worth dying for? Is this boss worth dying for? Because that isn't as dramatic as you think
Mhm.
it sounds. Because when you look at what causes death in women these days, even including our pregnancy mortality is skyrocketing because of stress.
Yeah,
Women are dying in and after childbirth because of stress. We are falling on the list of countries of maternal mortality. Like, and I'm
crazy.
and so this idea of we're not just tired, we're dying from this, right? Because energy deficiencies, that's where the road leads. So really, like, take it seriously, right?
Mhm.
And ask yourself, is this worth dying for? Is this person worth dying for? Is this issue worth dying for? Um, if not, right, then continue to do it and figure out a way to do it while refueling a little bit more. If you say, no, they're not worth dying for, figure out something else to do. The money will work.
Agree. Agree. And sometimes, people don't realize when they close one door, it's actually a blessing, and then greater things open up. So we
Absolutely.
are actually winding down on time, Arin. But before we go, what is one quick piece of advice that you might have for our viewers or listeners today?
You're worth it. That you are worth saying no to other people and keeping some of that energy for yourself. Um, we don't
Fabulous.
remind ourselves of that enough, that we're worth our own energy, right? Because we say, they need this, someone else needs this, they deserve this. And we don't say, I deserve it. So if you just wake up in the morning and say, I am worth my own energy and I have a right to keep my own energy. And I kind of have a lot of fun when I keep my own energy, and I'm kind of liking fun more than dying early, right? We're
Yes.
worth it.
More energy, more fun. I'm worth it. That sounds like a good plan to me. So that does conclude our interview with Arin. Just a reminder, you can learn more about her at her website. So thank you so much for being here today, Arin. And please visit reginabarr.com so you can learn more about upcoming podcasts on our events page. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.